Begin Self-Publishing episode number 78. Getting that meeting with Stu Heinecke.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
On this week's show, I talked to Stu Heinecke, who is the author of How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. I got in touch with him after hearing him on the Business of Story podcast. He's a Wall Street Journal cartoonist by trade, but he's now started moving into what he calls contact marketing, which you have a small select group of customers who make a big effort to try and get in touch with and arrange a meeting for. Now, you might say that this isn't that applicable to self-publishers. We're trying to sell millions of books to millions of people. But I think even for self-publishers, there is a lesson to be learned from this approach of getting in touch with people. These may be influential bloggers or YouTubers or people who you want to get your book in front of, or major reviewers or other people like that. So I think the ideas in Stu's book are still relevant even to self-publishers who aren't looking for agents, or there's still sense in having this small group of people that you're going to target. And in his book, he takes through the various approaches that people have made where they've got in touch with a highly influential person like a CEO of a big company and managed to arrange a meeting with them, and from there managed to get some business for their company. You can see that obviously on a smaller scale, this kind of thing could work quite well for a self-publisher. I'm not suggesting you all go and approach Oprah Winfrey and try and plug your books on her show, but you get the idea. On a smaller scale, people who may seem unreachable are often reachable with what's called a contact marketing campaign. So now over to the interview. Hi Stu, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. Good to be here.
Okay, so how did a cartoonist end up writing a marketing book?
Good question. And a little bit of a circuitous route there. I've always had a dual track in my career. So I've always been not always, but I started out as a cartoonist. I did it because I was just so interested in it. So I would draw and submit things and start getting drawings into the newspaper in Los Angeles. I was going to say local paper, but that's a big locality. And then at the same time, I was educated in marketing. So that's my degree is in marketing. And I also have just a very deep passion for cartooning. And I ended up very early on in my career finding ways to mix the two, cartooning and marketing. And that's actually the genesis of this book, how I used those cartoons to break through to people who made a big difference in being, actually, they allowed me to launch my business. And it came from contact with 24 people. That was it. So I've just found them always to be useful, certainly in marketing, especially, and also in publishing. Every chapter in my book is headed by one of my cartoons. Cartoons they're just great devices for not only getting people's attention, and we know from readership surveys done by magazines and newspapers that cartoons they're almost always the best read and remembered parts of the publications they're in, but also, so I guess we should say though that means that they get more attention than just about anything you could put in print or on a screen. But also, if you think about the nature of humor, it's always about truth revealed in a twist, right? I mean, you've probably noticed, Tim, that once you finish laughing at something, you say, "Oh my God, that's so true," or "I know someone like that," or "I've been through something like that." There's always some point of truth and really point of agreement that comes out of a cartoon. So think about that as a marketing device. It's something that gets more attention than just about anything you can put in print or on a screen. And then once people read it, and this really all just happens immediately. It's really a sort of a legal form of subliminal advertising. If they say, "Ha, that's great," what they're doing is they're saying, I agree with that central point. So it's always just been mixed together. I've just used cartoons as well as a way to break through to people that I should never have been able to break through to. So here it's just a natural that a cartoonist like me, and I'm also a businessman, and I own a business, I own a marketing agency, should combine the two.
Okay, so obviously the gist of your latest book is about arranging a meeting with anybody, and you do that by sending them cartoons. I suppose the question some of the listeners would say, well, we're not cartoonists. How could we use the same approach to make contact with a small group of very important people?
Well, I thought your audience was cartoonists, but okay. Actually,
no, that's the cartoonist podcast. That's the next one I'm doing.
No, actually, it's a great question. And really, I guess I should continue my story a little bit. When I started my business, I wanted to combine cartooning and direct marketing at the time. And I wanted to do it for magazines, by the way. And magazine publishers in the U.S., they sold magazines differently. A lot of times, half of their sales come from newsstand sales, and the other half come from selling subscriptions. So people are subscribing to the magazine, they get a discount. And there was just this constant flurry of direct mail campaigns going all over the place, trying to get people to subscribe. And so the wonderful thing about publishers at that time as direct marketers is that they were probably some of the most sophisticated and relentless testers and users of direct marketing. So, and they also had wonderful budgets. So all in all, I wanted to connect with them and make them my clients. So my first two assignments were for Rolling Stone and Bon Appetit magazines. I think you may know these. I don't know if your audience will know them or not. They're pretty popular magazines in the U.S. And my test campaign beat their controls, which was amazing. And to explain that, the control is the package that is the most effective thing they've ever mailed. And then they continue, obviously that's the one they're going to mail from that point forward, but they're always testing against it. So in a statistical sense, that campaign that they're constantly rolling out to a large audience is their statistical control against which they test. So I beat their control for both of the magazines right out of the box. That's sort of like, I'm going to use a U.S. metaphor here. It's like a rookie getting up to bat in the big leagues and hitting 2 Grand Slam home runs. It's unusual for it to happen. It was a wonderful thing. And I realized that, well, what I need to do now to spread this to spread my services to the rest of the publishing industry, I needed to reach probably 24 VPs and directors of circulation, or really circulation marketing for these big publishers. They're all based in Manhattan. They're these are just elite media companies. It's very difficult to reach people like that. But I just shrugged it off because I thought, well, that's what I have to do. That's the mission. And I also knew that, as a direct marketer, I kept hearing the number 1%. If you get a 1% response rate to your campaign, you're doing really, really well. Well, if I got a 1% response rate to a campaign that was going out to 24 people, that would have meant I probably, well, it doesn't even amount to one person. So it wouldn't have worked. But in fact, I was thinking, well, even if I got a 10% response rate, that would be horrible. I need to get 100% response rate. Well, now I was going against another thing that all the pundits of direct marketing were saying, which was that 100% response rates are impossible. Well, I guess they are in direct marketing, but they certainly aren't in contact marketing, which is a term that I've used for this in my book. I needed to get 100% response rate, and I needed to reach all of them, and not only reach them, but I needed to sell to all of them. Well, that's exactly what happened as a result of my first, I didn't know what to call it, so I called it a contact campaign. And what I did was I put together an 8x10 print of a cartoon. All of my cartoons in marketing campaigns are personalized, so they're always about the recipient. And I combined that with a letter just saying, this is the device I just used to beat the controls for Rolling Stone and Bon Appetit magazines. And I think we should put this to the test for your titles. Well, I spent less than $100 on that campaign, probably less than $50. I don't really remember what it was. And I ended up connecting with all of them, and all of them became clients. And we're talking about clients like the Wall Street Journal and Time Inc. and Condé Nast. And so these are publishing giants in the U.S. They're the biggest publishers in the U.S. Anyway, I broke through to all of them. They all became clients. It launched my business. It was worth millions of dollars to me. And it all came from using a $100 campaign to reach 24 people. So that's how I used cartoons, or how I started using cartoons as contact devices. But what I found was that the more I looked around, the more I realized that people have been coming up with just incredibly clever and audacious ways of breaking through to people who are very, very, just critically important to them. And my use of cartoons was just a small part of what contact marketing really is all about. And people have been using gifts and all kinds of variations of giving a gift, or using the phone, email, mail. People have used video in very, very interesting ways, either delivered via email or on iPads, which is really interesting. And they've gone all the way through to just these really over-the-top approaches to people who are very important. One of the sales reps that I interviewed ended up using a pigeon to reach, I can't say his name, but he's one of the most famous, or was one of the most famous CEOs in the world. He was not only a CEO, but he was a worldwide celebrity. And reaching him is going to be very difficult, but a pigeon did it for him. So you don't have to be a cartoonist.
Well, you have to be a pigeon breeder instead.
You just have to be audacious, I think. You just have to believe you belong there in contact with this person, and you need to be audacious in your approach.
Okay, so, I mean, you make the distinction between basically a stunt and one of these marketing approaches. What would you say is that distinction between just doing something as a stunt to get somebody's attention and having a more consistent kind of contact marketing approach?
Yeah, I think that the difference really is if it's a campaign, if it's a contact marketing, a true campaign, then it's repeatable. You can spread it to other sales reps on your team. You can use it across your sales team if you have one. And it's not only repeatable, but there's a process in it, and there's a consistency to results. And I would say also that it ends up, I mean, the end result is that you not only do you want to break through to someone, because you could break through to someone with a rock through the window too, I suppose. And certainly you wouldn't have developed much of a rapport as a result of doing that. So you want to be able to develop a rapport. And I think really it's that you want to do something or send something to them, engage them in some way that they end up saying, wow, I love the way Tim thinks, for example. I just love the way this guy thinks. I've got to get in touch. I mean, we've got to talk, and really we need this kind of thinking in our organization. If you were to get that kind of reaction to whatever it is you're doing, then I would say that's the difference. You are contact marketing at that point. You're not popping a stunt out there. Now, I just mentioned the example of someone using a pigeon to break through to this CEO, and it might be a good idea to share that story at some point during our interview. But I think that certainly does border on, and the name of the category, over the top. It really is stunt-like. I'm really referring to stories like that. I've heard of people saying, there was one contact that I just wasn't able to break through to. So one day I went over to their offices, figured out which parking stall was the contact's parking stall, and I parked there and then waited in the lobby and waited for this person to come in. And they did. Sure enough, they came in just fuming, saying, who the hell is in my parking spot? Get this car towed. And he stood up in the lobby and said, well, actually, that was me. And I'm happy to move it if you'll walk with me, if I could talk with you just during our walk to my car. And those kinds of things, I think, are just the guy ended up saying, actually, his fuming expression changed to one of laughter. And he enjoyed the audacity of it. Certainly that is audacious, but he could have easily said, you know what? I'd also call the cops on this guy. I want the guy arrested, or, I want him to receive a ticket for what he's just done. There's another one where someone waited in Steve Jobs' parking spot, and they camped out in a lawn chair with a box of a dozen donuts. And when he showed up, he said, tell me why I shouldn't have security remove you. And, well, no, I'll move my chair, but may I walk with you? I've got donuts. May I walk with you just to the lobby? And by the time they did that, Steve invited them up and waved aside security and so forth. But I just don't think that's something you would want to train your sales team to do. I think you'd end up with a terrible reputation. And I don't know if these things, I mean, the audacity of both of those examples, the parking stall examples, certainly exhibits audacity, but I just think there's a risk of having people say, I don't like that at all. I think that's just too forward, too aggressive. And I really didn't want to talk to them about window cleaning services. And I still don't. All I've found is just they're more obnoxious than they were before. Yeah,
so it sounds like it's more of a stunt if there's a real risk of it backfiring as much as anything.
Yeah, I would say that, I can tell you also that although sometimes people react negatively to my current cartoons, for example, mostly these things end up being, it depends on what form it is. Typically I'm using what I call a big board to send a cartoon to someone. So it's an 18 by 24 inch, quarter inch thick foam core board. Actually, it's gator board, so it's very tough. material that's used for indoor signage. And on one side, there's a cartoon about the recipient. And on the other side, there's all the branding and messaging about why we should meet, who I am. And when those are received, we know that the CEOs walk around with them under their arm and show it off in the office. They keep them they keep them in their office probably the rest of their careers. They might put them on their credenza. And I've just heard many stories about these CEOs having these things, and they'll tell the reps that are using that we've helped break through that the big board is a constant source of conversation when people walk into their office, those sorts of things. If I send it as a card or a postcard, they'll end up either on a refrigerator door if it was received at home, or on an office wall, and it stays there. Sometimes they get framed, and I know that from all of that, they're being received quite positively, and that's a good thing. I mean, now that I know that when they receive one of these things, they're saying, "Oh my God!" I mean, I just get that reaction constantly. I love the way you think, and that's exactly what you want from your contact marketing campaign.
Okay. Something else that I took away from the book is the importance, you say, of making sure you have a good relationship with what would be the executive assistant. But if we're talking more generally, because obviously I'm not sure how many CEOs necessarily my listeners would be targeting, but they might be trying to get to, say, an agent or some sort of screenwriting person or something along those lines. Why is having a good relationship with the person's assistant a good idea?
Well, first of all, actually, you've raised 2 points. One is I keep talking about CEOs, and I'm glad you brought that up, that we're not all looking to reach CEOs. Even I'm not. But here's the thing. CEO is a euphemism for many things. And so one of those would be center of enterprise opportunity. So whatever it is you're trying to do, what you're trying to do is find the CEO of the problem you're trying to solve, or the CEO of the opportunity, I suppose, that you're seeking out. So it doesn't always have to be the chief executive officer that you're reaching out to. This stuff works across the board with most, basically just about anyone. But you mentioned executive assistants as well. And, so many sales reps that I've spoken to, and sales trainers and so on, they call them either admins, or short for administrative assistants, or gatekeepers. That's the big one. And I think that executive assistants probably a very grating thing to hear, that they're called gatekeepers, or maybe they understand why. I mean, it is a big part of their job. They want to keep the people out, the people who don't belong in contact with their executive or the person they're reaching for. That is part of their job, to keep people out, but it's also, and equally, their job to act as a talent scout and find those things, find the people and the things, the opportunities that they might have otherwise, that their executive in other words, might have otherwise missed. So they're looking for those diamonds in the rough to bring to their executive. And that's a great credit to them when they do that. So our job as contact marketers is to help the executive assistant understand what the value is in our calling and in our reaching out to propose and have a meeting or a phone call with the person we're trying to reach. And in fact, really, I think of them as vice presidents of access, because really, if you think about it, if we're talking now about the executive assistant or to the actual CEO, the actual chief executive officer, well, they're reporting to the CEO just like the other members of the C-suite are. And so their position it really is a vice president, or really almost a C-level executive themselves. They're just in charge of access and coordinating work with the CEO, with their executive. So they're really important people, and you should be including them in your campaign. Certainly, at least you should be engaging them first, and including them in your contact bid. I mean, a lot of times sales reps will ask me, well, I'm always looking for ways to circumvent the gatekeeper, and that's just not what you should be doing. You should be involving them. And I shouldn't just say that over and over. I should give an example, although it's going to be a cartoon example. I always engage those executive assistants first. In fact, when I encounter one, I'm relieved, because I know that I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to explain what the value is that I'm going to bring to their executive. And I know that they're going to hear it, and they're going to understand that there is value. And I'm ready to say to them, would you mind if I send you an email just to explain this, or just something that you can pass along easily? Oh my gosh, yes, that would be wonderful. And usually I start out with a VIP statement, something that, let's say, a dozen words or less, gets either the executive, actually whoever it is I'm speaking with, gets them to say, wow, I need to hear what this person has to say. And so mine is, when I get on the phone with someone, I introduce myself this way. I say, hello, my name is Stu Heinecke. I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists. Actually, that's enough right there to them say, what? Really? But I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists, a Hall of Fame nominated marketer and an author. And I'm sending a print of one of my cartoons to your boss. And while I want it to be a surprise to him or her, I don't want it to be a surprise to you. So would you mind if I coordinate this a little bit? And by then they're saying, oh my God, really? I would love to do it. Sure. And when I ask, may I send you an email? Can I get your email address? And I'll just send you an email that you, first of all, explains this a little better to you, but also is something you can pass along to your executive. Yes, that would be wonderful. Here's my address. And then also when I have it, I'll send you the tracking details. By then they're on your team and they're ready to get this in their executive's hands. And so by the time all of this happens, they're really quite friendly parties. And that's exactly what you want. You want them, I know that executives, a lot of times executives, they lean on their assistants so heavily that they'll say, well, what did you think of the person? Should I get in contact with them? Are they worth connecting with? And if they're saying, yes, I think this is worth your time, think about how easy that makes your job then. I mean, that just, you want to be engaging with these executive assistants in a very positive way, in a very collaborative way. And if you do that, you'll be quite rewarded.
Okay. So if we go back to the non-cartoon based contact marketing approaches, what is the cheapest marketing approach you've seen? And you might want to mention the pigeon one here. And what is the most expensive that you've seen people do? And how successful in terms of, I suppose we should use that awful term, return on investment, have they been?
Yes. And good. Thank you for the opening to talk about the pigeon story, because I'll share that with your audience. But the cheapest, the least expensive methods, actually these range in cost. I discovered there's just such a broad range of what people have been doing to reach people. By the way, the podcast that you're doing is a contact marketing, or can be a contact marketing campaign. I'm sure you've noticed that it gets you in touch with a lot of people who have all sorts of important ways of helping you out or connecting you to others and so on. But anyway, the range that I found was zero, so free, really, to $10,000 per contact. So there's quite a broad range. And so the least expensive are simple uses of email and the phone and social media, obviously social media. Now, these aren't actually free because you have to have a phone connection. You have to have an internet connection. If you're sending something through the mail, you're going to have to buy postage and materials, but they're, compared to $10,000 per contact, they're free. And, we found that with email, for example, just emailing a CEO or C-level executive, someone who's very important, very busy during the week. If you email them something, let's say early Saturday morning, before they get their day started, or Sunday in the evening when they're preparing for the week ahead, generally, those are actually great times to reach an actual CEO. You want to keep that email very, very short. Again, I would say less than a dozen words, but if it's very short, something they can respond to immediately, they do it. So actually something as simple as that actually works. And then you go all the way down to the most expensive. Well, the most expensive one, that $10,000 per contact, is an interesting story. This was told to me by Rick Bennett, who had a small advertising agency in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he had a client, a tech client, who had a startup company. And this client approached him one day and said, I would really like to get in front of Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, because I think he'd find my company very, very interesting as an acquisition. But I don't know how to get in front of him. And Rick said, well, no problem there. Rick is an audacious guy and a very audacious marketer. And he said, I know what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to produce a contact letter as a full page ad and we'll run it in the Wall Street Journal. So that's actually where the $10,000 cost came from. And what was interesting about that was that they did break through to Larry, and it wasn't because he was a reader himself of the journal. I'm sure he is, and I'm sure he saw the ad, but it's not that. It was that all of these people who had ready access to Larry, all of his friends and close confidants and so on, people who the executive assistant knew and would let through to Larry, they were calling him. They saw the ad, the letter in the journal as well. And they were calling him all day long. Well, I mean, not the same ones, but he was receiving calls all day long from all these people saying, "Hey, Larry, did you see that thing in the journal?" And so they did connect with him. They did meet with him. They actually sold the company to him. And that was a $350 million sale from that one contact. So, and that's the interesting thing about contact marketing. Everything is distorted about it. It could be a campaign to just one person. Or it could be, to a dozen people, or in my case, in my earlier story, 24 people. But it's not a mass marketing approach. So this was actually a legitimate contact marketing campaign. And the ROI on that campaign ended up, if you divide the numbers out, it's a 3.5 million% ROI, which is that's the biggest I've ever heard of. Typically, we're seeing more like 10 to, or, somewhere in the tens, even hundreds of thousands of percent ROI. But even that's just huge. Those are numbers that are just absolutely foreign to most marketers and to most forms of marketing. Now, I promised that story of the pigeon and how the sales rep broke through to the CEO. I should tell that really quickly because we're talking about costs and ROI here. So, and it has an interesting corollary at the end here. So here's this sales rep. He was selling a software solution, kind of a high-end software solution. I don't know, maybe he worked with Larry Ellison because it could have been an Oracle kind of thing. It was a $250,000 package that he was trying to sell to this company. It's a tech company. And actually, I'll just say that if your audience members have ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, you'll understand my reference to a certain fruit company. And that's the company we're talking about.
Okay.
He was calling on the fruit company's engineering department, and they loved his solution. They said, well, look, you've sold us, but the next step is you've got to talk to our purchasing department. And so that was his next step, and purchasing wouldn't talk to him. Nobody would return his calls. They shut him down. And he thought, well, fine, then I'm going to go around you. I'll go directly to the CEO. And that proved to be very, very difficult, as he found out. Well, he tried everything he could think of. He was sending faxes, letters, leaving voicemails, calling, talking to the admin, et cetera, but nothing was working. And so finally, one day, this plywood box shows up at the front counter, and it has air holes drilled into it and a handwritten letter attached to the box addressed to the CEO. And the letter said, amazingly to me, it was delivered to the CEO, because I think in this day and age, it might have been just discarded or somehow disposed of differently, but they delivered it to the CEO. And the letter said, look, I've been meeting with your engineering department to present my software solution. They love it. They know you need it. They said the next step is you're going to have to talk to purchasing. Purchasing wouldn't speak to me. So I've tried everything I could think of to reach you. I've sent faxes, sent letters, etc. Nothing has worked. So this is my final attempt to try to reach you. Well, I think already he's already told a great story. I mean, how could you resist reading on? And he said, well, look, if there's a pigeon inside the box and there's a capsule on his leg. And if you would just take the little slip of paper out of that capsule and write the name of your favorite restaurant, a date and a time, and put that paper back in the capsule and then release the pigeon, I'll meet you there. So the pigeon was released. The pigeon came back, and there was the name of a restaurant and a date and a time scrawled on a little piece of paper. And so they met, and the rep walked away with a $250,000 sale. That is close to a stunt, but if you think about it, the pigeon is a response device. I mean, there are a lot of corollaries to traditional marketing here, and at any rate, it made it fun to respond to this poor guy's request for a meeting. How could you resist doing that? I mean, there was a lot of audacity and so on. Now, we talked about ROI and cost for the campaign, and I don't think it was his pigeon, so I don't think he raised it and bought it or anything. I think he actually ended up just borrowing it from a friend. And so you really just have to ask yourself then, the only expense was, what do pigeons eat? And they eat chicken feed, I think. Other than the chicken feed, and I don't even think he spent anything on that. This was free. I don't know. Actually, let's say also that there could have been an expense for having a courier drop the pigeon off, or maybe he did it himself. I don't know. But anyway, I guess the point of it is, the cost was minimal or negligible, and the return was enormous. And I don't know if you can actually calculate the ROI on that one, but certainly it's I think a great story of how audacity wins the prize here.
Yeah. So I think that just wraps up all the questions I had in the time we've got available. How can people find out about you, your books, your cartoons, your businesses, and anything else you've got going on at the moment, Stu?
Well, they can certainly, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or it's probably easier on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at by Stu Heinecke. So BYSTUHEINECKE. Actually, I don't mind if you reach out by email. My email address is the same spelling, stuheinecke@gmail.com. You can go to my website. I actually run an agency, a contact marketing agency on an island just north of Seattle. The name of the agency is Contact, and the URL is contactmarketing.agency. So it's easy enough. And you can find my books really anywhere. On Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, etc. Not hard to find. Audible, you mentioned the audio book. It's on Audible. And I've got 3 books out. So the first one is called Drawing Attention. It was a book that I wrote about using cartoons in marketing and other business missions. The next one was a literary classic called Big Fat Beautiful Head. Actually, it's a book of my cartoons. And then the third one, the one that's out now and getting all sorts of attention, is How to Get a Meeting with Anyone, which is what we've been talking about. It's about contact marketing, and you can find that anywhere that books are sold except the airport.
Okay. Well, it's very good to have you on the show today, Stu.
What a pleasure. It was great to join you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.